Hey, what's happening, everybody? Today's episode is honestly one of my favorites. It is the first shift interview for season 2. It is with my good friend Charles Ressler. We talk social dynamics, we talk social constructs. I got notes for days. We have thought-provoking conversation around what accountability means, like not just personal accountability, but like accountability on a grander scale through different lenses that honestly I hadn't really contemplated before. And there's a point during the conversation where I really had to like kind of compartmentalize my thoughts because I was having a hard time keeping up with some of the things that Charles was throwing at me. Because if you know me, I love to unpack hard concepts, hard conversations. I like to talk about things that maybe not everybody wants to talk about. And, Charles and I got right into it right away. So it was really, really awesome. And we talk a little bit about mental health. We talk a lot about um, just what and how different people navigate the world. Because, truth be told, Charles and I couldn't be more different outside of the fact that we are compassionate, we love people, and we want to see people succeed, and we want to see them grow. Outside of that, I don't think we have very much in common. But here's the thing: that's all you need. That's all we needed to have this great conversation was the understanding that people are people, humans are all doing the best they can, and we really need to start looking at each other that way. And so it was a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. So enjoy, take a listen, and this one's a little bit longer, so if you got to break it up into 2 or 3 sessions, please do, because there's some really great stuff in it. Thanks for being here, thanks for paying attention, and thanks for continuing to listen to
Essentially, I
shit.
mean, I'm super fascinated with and sort of the journey that I've been on for the last couple of years, in part because of what we're talking about with having kids and I have 6 daughters, which has challenged some of my upbringing, some of my thinking, some of all that. And uh where I've sort of landed the last 2 years or so is really in this place of accountability and vulnerability.
Mm.
And I don't believe I think that accountability is an extremely important lost trait. I think that we don't hold each other accountable. We don't certainly don't hold those in power accountable.
Mm.
And we could complain about that and we could point fingers, but realistically for me, I think it's come down to like, okay, well, what can I do? I can hold myself accountable and I can raise my kids and I can keep my circle to be true to what they say their core values are. And where I sort of in navigating that, I landed in this place that like, how do you hold each other or yourself accountable if you can't be vulnerable and be vulnerable enough to say I messed up, or I'm not good here, or I need to learn better, or I need to do different. And so in my own journey, I've certainly not mastered it. I feel like I am constantly recognizing things I could do better, and it's helped me sort of come to a place where I could say, how can I help others see that, and how can I help others make different choices for themselves. I'm really careful to not say better, because what's good for you may suck for me, and so it's not that it's a better choice. It's just how can I help people make different choices for themselves. If people look at their situation and go, wow, this sucks, I really don't like where I am, then how can we take ownership of that and fix it and
Yeah.
come with different solutions. And so I do this podcast. That's where kind of I was like, what format, what thing? I wrote a book, sold, some of that, and that's great. And also, how can I keep the conversation going? So that's what I do this for. And I get to talk to really awesome people who I think, one, fascinate me, interest me, and are doing things that I think land in that space of vulnerability and accountability.
Mm.
And what you do, and I really want to hear more about how that's going and what that looks like, and how you went from Vegas to New York to LA. And honestly, like, one of the stories that made me think of you was the one man show that you did probably 7 6 7 years ago now.
Yeah.
Because that is like height of vulnerability
Yeah.
and true accountability, right? Like, you're right there, like there's no one else to blame because sink swim, it's all
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And then that led to this whole Dreammaker thing that I think you'd actually started before that, but
Yeah. Dreammaker came a couple of years
but
earlier. Yeah.
so I really kind of just want to go like, who are you, what are you up to, what's going on, and the Dreammaker, and sort of what you're doing now, and I'd love your thoughts because I respect you and I think you have great insight, and we have very different lifestyles,
We sure
which
do.
which father of 8, no kids,
Yeah.
but like we navigate the world differently, and that fascinates me because all those different perspectives I think help us become more intelligent and
Sure.
well-rounded in the way we approach things. So
Yeah.
I don't have a list of questions. I don't have.
Great.
We're
I'm
just
cool. I'm down for a convo.
just it's just a talk that could be 8 minutes, or
Yeah.
dinner. We'll see where it goes.
So this might be a little contrary to what you're trying to do, and I think we'll definitely get into radical accountability because I don't know how much you know about my childhood, but
Yeah.
it forced radical accountability in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that. But I do want to say that there is outside of self, this is coming from someone who is not gender conforming as a general rule, but also I had to navigate the shame that was very much thrust upon me from such a young age, starting in my family unit, but then also going out into the world around how gender, it's not okay to not conform to gender,
Sure.
especially if you're a boy, if you're a gendered male at birth, let's say.
Sure.
Which leads me to this big conversation about accountability, where it's like there are certain things that people cannot take accountability for. And I think it's a really important starting point when you're having this conversation because it is so vulnerable in that colonization of the predominantly Caucasian heteronormative male coming into the world and taking it over and thrusting their own thoughts, values, and value systems on others, specifically Indigenous people, specifically Black people, who had carried so much incredible wisdom about the world. I don't think I think there are certain people in the world that it's not their turn to be taking accountability. So I just really want to say that because I understand where you're coming from. And it's just on my heart every day because of what's going on in the world and the conversations that are being had, that it's time really for people like us to take more accountability and take that burden off of, Indigenous people and Black people and immigrants, gay people, trans people. The burden of accountability has been carried on their shoulders to a degree that is now untenable.
It's an interesting perspective, and I love that we're going right into it. Right, like I love having hard conversations and honest conversations. Going, okay, well, let's really unpack what that means, right? Because when I wrote my book, I wrote about really like if your life sucks, it's your fault. Like that's like kind of like the Twitter version of it, right? And I had pushback from people even before I published who would kind of proofread or go through stuff and be like, well, I was abused as a child, or I was this or that. And I'm like, I get it. Like, so was I. Like, I was sexually assaulted as a kid. Like, I know, and I would never say that particular act is my fault. Like, I didn't cause that to happen. However, as an adult, so I'm very clear to say, like, once you hit 18 and once you become an adult in this world and you start to make decisions for yourself, what happens to you isn't necessarily something that you could be held accountable for, right? And so I think that we're kind of in the same page there, where you're talking about, because absolutely, like, the it's funny. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and like, I didn't know you were a Christian, and I was like, well, I don't go around telling people very much because the last thing I want to be is a white Christian male in 2020. Like, honestly, like the judgments and the things that people think about automatically.
But if you add ally on the end of that, it's actually a really lovely thing to be.
It can be, right? It very much can be. And I have had friends who tell me, well, like, I would have never thought you were that. And I'm like, that's the idea.
Yeah.
Is that because what you view those labels as, I don't tick those boxes because I love everyone. I want to have conversations with everyone. I want to be educated on gender things, like, because I certainly have my own viewpoints, and I'm so open to being not necessarily wrong, but to being misinformed and uneducated, and having someone say, hey, here's a different perspective, think about it through this lens.
Sure.
So I love that we're already like that we're talking about that, because yeah, there is so much that happens for people and to people that they have zero control over. And
Yeah.
for me, what I want to help people understand is like, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
And
I think it's easier when you are specific, when you're white, to say, and I have always also, by the way, believed up until recently, the thing that you just said, you turn 18, you become responsible for your own life. No more victim mentality. I think, left home at 15 or 16 years old without a dime in my pocket, and had to build a life by myself. But I've never been Black trying to do that.
right.
But I have been queer trying to do that. And
Right.
I think, being queer in spaces, the way you and I met, we were in a very masculine driven, startup tech, Tony Hsieh playground. And I never really fit. And it was really difficult for me to maneuver in those spaces as a leader in those spaces and have my voice heard. And I think, the me that you knew then was someone who really fought and was loud and was at everything and would never let opportunities pass, because I said, no, you will see me and you will hear me.
Sure.
I'm not going to take a victim mentality and then cry at home that my ideas never came to fruition, or my contribution was never recognized, or any of that. But if I were a Black man doing that, it would be perceived as aggressive. It would have a completely different lens on it.
Sure.
And it's hard to make that person, to ask that person to take accountability for that, because it was never their responsibility, and they live in a world where it's pervasive. And
Yeah, it's
so
interesting because I don't know. I'm trying to think through that and be, because I feel like regardless of our intention or our motivation,
sure.
how we show up is up to us. How we are perceived is completely out of our control. Like I remember, I mean, you and I met in this really unique sort of
Sesame Street.
like microcosm of the planet, right?
Yeah.
In this space. And for those that maybe don't know our history, Charles and I worked together on First Friday, which is a big art, music, food event in Las Vegas. And when
Also,
I
life
would
is
say
beautiful.
that when we worked on that project, it was probably at its height. I don't know how successful it is currently or what's going on, but we were certainly there when it was very large and successful. And I would like to think that we had a lot to do with that. And festivals like Life is Beautiful and other really awesome things, right? And because they're artistic and they're creative, there's a pretty wide berth for people to be unique, I think. It's funny because I felt being in that space not being as creative or as boisterous or as I hate to use the word flamboyant. I'm trying to find a different,
That's a great
fashionable,
word.
like there's other words, right? But I always felt like because I wasn't that, I was pretty like straight and family man and not, I don't drink. Like I had very similar feelings about my existence and my participation in those events that you've shared, because I didn't fit that mold, because a lot of those people were like super young families with one or two kids, or they didn't have any kids, and I lived in the suburbs. I had a huge family. And
Yeah.
so it's fascinating to me how we both come from very different backgrounds, have very similar feelings and insecurities around what we're doing. And I think that's kind of the thing too, is that how we're perceived, it's just not within our control, right? And so like I can show up and be kind to you. And I think that's where I come from is, am I being kind? Am I coming from a place of love? Am I trying to listen in honor? I'm gonna screw up. I'm gonna, see you in a certain way, and I'm gonna have my own biases and thoughts and restrictions. But if I'm open enough to at least hear you and see you and say, hey, wow, that seems really aggressive. Tell me why you're feeling that way. Tell me what's happening there. And that's where I come from is I try to say, let's stop creating the stories of like, oh, well, he's loud and boisterous and flamboyant, so he must be this. It's like, no, be curious and go, hey, I see that this is how you show up. Where's that coming from? And then you get the opportunity to be honest about it and go, well, I don't know that I fit in here. And so I'm trying to fight for my voice and I'm trying to figure, but I think so many of us don't take the time to have honest conversations around that, which is fair because the world is moving, 1,000 miles a minute. And we're all fighting for our place. And so that's really fascinating that's what's on your heart, because I love that. And I think it's such a really true and vulnerable place to come from is, because I'm a totally different person with a totally different lifestyle, feeling
Totally.
very similar feelings about that time in our life.
Yeah, it makes sense. I will say this though, not being responsible about how other people perceive you is not possible for some people, because if they're not aware of how other people perceive them, they could end up dead. And that's just a reality of the world that we're living in today.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I'm talking about. Like, who needs to be held? They have to take accountability. They have no choice but to take accountability, or they could get shot down in the street. But it's really not their accountability to take. And I guess when this conversation comes up, it's really the first thing that comes to my mind is about the world that we're living in and how it's really important that we start challenging the status quo around this particular conversation and saying who needs to be held accountable. And certainly you and I need to be held accountable. I mean, that's what I'm kind of saying.
Yeah.
And who gets a chance to rest now? And you and I being allies to those who have fought the fight for so long and now are due for a rest, is radical accountability. It's us taking radical accountability in our communities.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion. And I know this is really about personal accountability and personal vulnerability.
But it's not really, because like, it is about personal accountability. And the thing where that makes it get sticky is none of us live on an island. None of us live in a vacuum, right? And that's like one of my favorite things to address with my children is they're like, well, I did this, this, and this. And I'm like, that's great, but everything you do has impact. So for me, and I love this is fascinating. I don't think I was mentally prepared for this today, which is great because then it's just raw, right? Because that's kind of the key is for me, like why I do this is if I can help people recognize how their choices are hurting themselves and making better choices or different choices is going to help them better themselves. You almost can't not improve those around you by showing up as your best self, right? Like if I choose to be selfish, then I'm hurting you in the long run, right? And this really came home for me probably right before, I'm going to say with George Floyd, which is kind of embarrassing, but the idea that like I grew up in North Las Vegas. I grew up in a very poor part of town, was considered the ghetto. I was the minority being a white male. All my neighbors were black and brown people. And I sort of grew up with the mentality that like, I don't see race, like we're all just people and like, it's all good. And it wasn't until we had the George Floyd experience that my 23-year-old was saying all the crap that I said in 1992 or 1991 during the Rodney King riots. And I was like, really blown away. And I was like, I did this shit 25 years ago. Why are we still doing this? Why are we having this conversation again? Because we had, and even like sexual harassment, Me Too movement, like Anita Hill, we had sexual harassment classes we had to go to. I'm like, we've been through all this. And what I realized for me, like my perspective on it was, I've not done enough to be anti-racist. I've not done enough to be anti-homophobic. Like being an ally and being a friend to people of color and being a friend to people of different orientations wasn't enough, because what I wasn't doing was being a loud enough voice in my community to say it's not okay to, like, I just wasn't being vocal enough and I wasn't educating myself enough. And so my daughter and I had really interesting conversations around that, because I'm like, I don't understand. Like, how are we back where we were 25 years ago? And I really think it's because my generation, the Gen Xers of the world, we just kind of had our teen angst and we had our thing, and it was like, we're going to be cool with one another. But we didn't really think about how we could also empower one another. It was like our circles were really small. They weren't big enough,
It's also systematically put in place, and that's a conversation for another day and a different podcast. But it's a construct that is very much on purpose, that goes back to all colonization across. I mean, colonization is just the problem. At the end of the day, that's what caused, if there's a problem that we're facing in the world right now, that's the stem of it is that. And like I said, that's a completely different conversation than you're trying to have. But what I will say that really, I think, brings us nice into the pocket of what you're exploring in Shift is that one of the ways recently in my life that I've become really accountable, not only to myself, but also to my community, and also vulnerable, is in gender expression. And I think, I've always had a little bit of a eccentric, some might say flamboyant way. As a child, I cross-dressed and I was shamed by my family. It was not to be spoken of. I would get in trouble for it. And then going out into the world, I found my way of expressing that, but I didn't realize how many masks I put on even within that. And I'm realizing now that to the rest of the people in my community, and the ones that don't really have a choice, who will die if they don't have this ability to express, going out in the world as myself, fully and 100%, and being seen and forcing people to see me, and becoming so strong that I'm not bulletproof, but that the bullets pass through me, that I have such radical vulnerability in the world that it's impossible to get to me.
Sure.
Which is a challenge every single day when someone's screaming faggot across the street or throwing Diet Coke out the window at you, But to the people that I owe that, as one of the people who feels this way inside, to the community around me, that it's okay to be seen. And let's face it, I'm not the bravest person in the world. I've lived 3 places in my entire life: New York, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. And that's still happening in those communities, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when you live in Grove, Oklahoma?
Right. Yeah.
There's a dreamer from the Dreammaker program who's in Grove, Oklahoma. She's a trans woman. She works at Walmart. She works 80 hours a week. I think she actually has 2 jobs. One is at a call center. She lives in a trailer with 7 other people, and she's just trying to get her life started. She can't get access to hormones. They're too expensive. She wants to get a college degree. She keeps getting turned down I helped her apply for Pell Grants. I literally have seen this woman do so much to take accountability, and like cannot get a break.
Yeah.
I reached out to Laverne Cox, got to her manager. I reached out to every trans, LGBTQ, ally, celebrity, doctor. I cannot find someone to help this woman. She's one of the forgotten ones in the world, you know? And I think about her when I put on a dress and walk out the front door,
Sure.
knowing that everyone is going to stare at me and that it's going to be uncomfortable for me.
Right. So is that, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, right? Like how is it that we're in a situation where people can't get help? You know, how do 7 people fit in a trailer? I mean, all of those
I
things.
know.
What I'm curious about, or would like to kind of start with then, is like what does that mean for you to, like, because that seems kind of like a heavy burden, which you know, to be thinking of and to be wondering how other people are existing and feeling as if there's a responsibility for you to sort of break down some of those walls and almost like normalize, you know, that behavior so that maybe it'll trickle from LA to Oklahoma, right? Like, is that fair to say that you kind of feel that? Or
To some extent, I also feel that my truest forms of self-expression were shamed away from me. So it's both, right? It's how can I really be myself in the world? Basically, I was passing to some extent, you know, and that's, it's like, there's some responsibility I have to take for that because I can. I mean, there's privilege just in the fact that I can do that and live my
100%.
life in a way that isn't psychologically damaging.
Yeah.
So I can wear blazers, you know, I don't feel, I don't like, if I were forced to wear a blue pinstripe suit for the rest of my life, I would probably not want to live. Right. But like, I don't need to wear a dress.
Right.
I want to, I always have, I have my own style with it, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you're a trans woman like this woman in Oklahoma, then you have, like, she has to, right?
Yeah.
She can't
And
live. It's like her blue pinstripe suit.
yeah. And if she were to do that in that community and walk out the door, it's a real possibility she'd be physically harmed.
She deals with that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Also, she works at Walmart.
Yeah.
You know, so you're right, there is a lot to unpack in that. But Rosalie, I would say I'm not doing it so much so that for Rosalie as much as I respect so deeply what Rosalie is doing, that she gives me the bravery to express who I am. And she's, I mean, I say Rosalie, but there's a lot of people that I see in the world who give me that bravery and who, I mean, the truth of the matter is, again, it all comes back to colonization, that two-spirited people were revered by all cultures outside of the West. So buried with the chieftains of native tribes in the special burial grounds where only the most wise and magical of the community were buried. That's how revered this identity was before puritanical, monotheistic, right? White, male, patriarchal, let's not call it male, let's call it patriarchal, people came in and said, no, 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 no. And what's really funny about it is that when we look at our climate crisis, which is another thing like that as a community we need to take accountability for, it's also the two spirits and the indigenous people who have the answers, right? Because they know how to live off the land. They know for generations and generations and generations how to create medicine and how to use food as medicine, and how to move your body in a way that keeps you young, keeps your spine flexible, yoga, right? Ayurveda, these traditions that have been just squashed. And so, yeah, Rosalie is one way that I do it. Another one is studying and learning the wisdom of these tribes that I speak of. And of course, a lot of what I do in the world is about helping people empower themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess everything I say has a lot to unpack, but
Well, sure. So when you talk about that, right, and you talk about so this is a conversation that I've had with a few people around sort of cultural appropriation and colonization and that sort of a thing, right?
yeah.
And in terms of like when we look at those things, how do you, because like, so I'm trying to find the words here, but like I cautiously use the word flamboyant because I have people who have shared with me that word is inappropriate and that word is derogatory. You didn't have a problem with it. You're like, that's a great word. Like it's actually, it's appropriate. So for me, like where I sort of try to struggle, or where I don't try to struggle, where I do struggle is in navigating, like, what is that balance between understanding different cultures, indigenous people, aligning with them appropriately without then becoming like, I sit on the board of a nonprofit.
Okay.
And it's 5 people that sit on the board. 4 of them are women. I'm the only male. We're all white. And we had a conversation around helping, certain groups and doing different things. And then it came up that like, well, we're all white people and we work primarily in Africa. And so do we need to get some people of color on the board? It's like, well, what does that, like, if our job and our goal and our intention is good, and we're not excluding anyone because no one of color has come to us and said, hey, I want to get more involved. Like there's such a fine line. And that's where I kind of get into the, I can't be responsible if somebody reaches out to us and says, it's 5 white people, what's wrong with you? And it's like, well, we've invited, we've put, job searches out on Indeed for social media managers. And if no one that fits another box applies or comes to us, am I doing something wrong? Or how do we, like, what do you say to someone who's maybe listening to this, who's in total disagreement with you? Because I have lots of conversations around systemic racism, systemic problems that disempower people. I have colleagues or friends that don't know if those things really exist. And like my point of view is like, how can you not see? Like I sometimes struggle to see their point of view, even though I try. But I'm wondering what you would say to, like, how do you navigate those things in a respectful way so that you can study indigenous tribes, you can see the 2 spirits, and you can see, like, some would say that yoga is an Indian practice and that you have no right as a white male to be appropriating their religious experience. But like at the same time, it's like, well, if it works, it works. I want to.
Yeah, I think what it really there's a couple of things. So it's not appropriation if you are ascribing and supporting the community that makes it or does it, or
Sure.
In other words, hot core power yoga is appropriation. It's a bunch of white people who got together, right? Bikram yoga is not appropriation because there are many ways in which the organization of Bikram, we won't get into all his
No, I understand. I'm with you.
The problems with him as a person, but supporting the communities that the wisdom that we learn in a Bikram class comes from. Wearing a dashiki in and of itself is not appropriation. Especially, it's not appropriation if you bought that dashiki from someone who comes from a culture, if you're investing into their community, right? If you are upholding the wisdom that comes with the art form that it is.
Sure.
And I think, we see this in celebrity culture a lot, where it's being called out as appropriation because it truly is someone wearing braids on the cover of a magazine. A white woman did her braids or whatever it is, right? It
Sure.
doesn't have
Yeah,
to be
I'm
that a
with
white woman did her braids. It's this idea, or wearing a feather headdress as a Halloween costume,
Right.
where, that is complete appropriation. Being invited to a tribal ceremony of elders and asked to wear or gifted a headdress is not appropriation, in my opinion, right?
Yeah,
And
no,
this
I
is
love
coming
that.
from conversations like, I didn't want to wear a dashiki outside.
Yeah.
And then I asked some people in that community, in a community of makers, and they said, where did you get it? How did you come to own it? Who were you supporting in the process? And they said, you did it all. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The next thing is about a board of white people helping people in Africa. I really do think that's problematic personally.
Yeah. No, I'm open to, I definitely.
Yeah, I think that you need some African people. And not only do you need African people on your board, you need to give them the power. There's no way you can possibly know how to help Africans
Of course.
in any country. And what's something so fascinating to me is that there are so many indigenous tribes in Africa that have 600 people left, 1,200 people left. And it's because of white people running charities who are going in and teaching them how to be Western and destroying. They're building wells and they're destroying the food sources. And it's this idea of the idea that we know something better is there's so much hubris in it. There's such a lack of accountability in that to me. The first explorers that came to the United States called the people who they found here savages, when in reality, the savage ones were the people who arrived in this country, spreading disease, spreading alcoholism, scalping. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine what kind of savage it would take to take someone's scalp off their skull? The people who were here were communing with nature. They were preventing forest fires.
Sure. And there was also warring within tribes, and there was also that amongst.
Sure, but I mean,
so it's not as if, I mean, look, I'm as in alignment with how this country came to be, with you as I think.
Well, not just this country, and I don't mean to make it about America.
No, it's I get that.
It's a global,
like
New Zealand, Africa, South America.
And people are people, right? People are bad and people are good and people make mistakes, and different tribes have warred with each other and they've done horrible things. I think the difference is, like, for me, where we start to get into like American exceptionalism, or any country, right? But we live in America, so I'll use that as an example. But like American exceptionalism, we're the greatest country. I'm like, well, we're just as screwed up as anyone else. Like we've done all sorts, and the idea of like, whitewashing history or taking away the negative things and going, well, we don't need to dwell on that. And it's like, well, that's part of the story, right? Like, I don't dwell on being sexually assaulted. I don't dwell on having a physically abusive father. But those things are part of my story. Right. And I also don't ignore them. And so when I lose my temper with my kids and I feel like I want to smack them, I don't wonder where that comes from. I know where it comes from. And I recognize that and I go, that needs to be solved, rather than ignoring it, right? But I think it's really fascinating, because like, so circle back to the charity that I work with. we don't run anything, right? Like the people that are on the board are here. The people that run the programs are in country, and they bring those programs to us, and we just fundraise and help to navigate and make sure that they're protected and that there's things, right? So like this is where we get back to perception, right? Because the perception is, if you look at our website and you see 4 or 5 white faces, the assumption is that we're going to Africa and we're teaching them how to do Western things, when in fact we don't. We partner and align with in-country organizations who don't have the privilege that we have, quite frankly, the resources and the means and the internet and the ability to get their voices heard. And so but the way that you expressed that is exactly what we take into consideration, is like, how is it being perceived, and how do we get something resolved? And at the same time, it almost doesn't matter how well we do it, because if you leave your house in a dashiki, regardless of how you obtained it or what you've done or the permissions that you've been granted, somebody is going to see you and think what they want to think. And maybe they're vocal enough to say something to you, and that opens the door for you to then go, okay, do I just ignore them, or do I take the time to stop and educate them and say, hey, you know what? Totally valid point. And for your information, here's how it was obtained. Here's my friends that I'm in community with. Here's the reason why, right? And not, it's a poor analogy, but it makes me think of, I'm Scots-Irish. My family has come from Ireland. Granted, the 1600s, like been here. We're part of the initial colonization problem.
Yeah, my partner's family is the same.
But I know my family history, and I know that, like, being raised, I was told I was Irish, but then when I did our genealogy, I'm like, my family was in Ireland for 60 years. We're Scottish. And so I have my family plaid, and I wear kilts, and I am happy. But what's funny to me is when I wear them, it's often like joked about, and it's seen as like something to be done only in special occasions or to get attention. And it's interesting because as you were talking about expression, I've found myself not wearing them on occasion when I feel like, oh, I'm going to wear a kilt today. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with the stuff. I don't want to have to listen to the jokes. I don't want to have to talk to the guy at the store. I don't want to have to. So I don't. Because it's just easier for me not to, because it's seen as a costume, not as
what's so funny about this? Part of this radical accountability conversation is, guess what? You don't have to.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because you don't want, I think there's this politeness culture that we expect, but like the guy making a comment about your kilt has no right to do that. Just as you have every right to ignore him and not have that conversation with him.
Right.
And to prepare your energy to go to the coffee shop and someone say to you, nice kilt, you can just say thanks.
Yeah. No, I agree.
If they ask you another question, you can say, honestly, I didn't dress for you today.
Right.
And just shut it right down.
Yeah.
Which is something that, again, that bringing that like level of empowerment into communities, like that it's okay to someone, you probably realize, like, I'm a magnet for people to talk to.
Sure.
And as I've gotten older over these last years, specifically like moving back to New York and then moving to LA, I really started to become a shut-in because of this. Also, I'm like I like feel everything. So people wanting to talk to me is exhausting.
Yeah, my wife struggles with that because she's an empath as well. And
yeah, it's hard. I'm learning now to be like, that's my hand in your face, and just shut it right down. Hi, you think people don't talk to me, right? Yeah. And I'm very tame today because like I did yoga this morning and I was running around and I didn't really have time to turn and look for you.
Yeah, right. No,
I also know you, and you're usually like, I like you, I wanted you to like have the, you know, Keith Rockstar sort of Gen X
I love
vibe.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's good. I think
Yeah.
so. I'm gonna take a left turn here then, because the other thing that's coming to my mind as we're talking about this is the mental health aspect of it,
Mm.
right? And it's kind of been turning over in my head as we've been talking, and you just kind of touched on it, like you had to sort of retreat a little bit, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are around, because I really feel like we are not doing enough to talk about mental health in this country. And when we do, even now, it's, you know, like Simone Biles. And I don't watch the news. Like I've not watched cable news or local news in 6 or 7 years. I know what I know and I hear what I hear. And then when something piques my interest, I go read multiple articles, different sources, all those things. It's exhausting, but I have the privilege to have the time to not just do that. Right. So like, I don't even know the full Simone Biles story.
Okay.
Only from, or the Matt Damon story, which I actually really want to touch on, because I was like, what is he talking about? But like one of the in the mental health space, what I gathered from what I saw was that she decided she wasn't going to compete in a couple of things or some stuff because her mental health was at risk. Some of that had to do with Olympic drug rules and things that she could or couldn't take. And I was blown away at the amount of things that I saw from my circle saying that she deserved people's support, which only tells me that there was a whole other circle of people not supporting her. And because I don't watch any of that stuff, I didn't know what was happening. But I was blown away. Like there's even a conversation about a human being deciding not to do something that wasn't good for her, and other people, to your point, having shit to say about it. Like I'm not one of my friends asked me, like, what do I think? And I said, I think I'm not an Olympian. I have zero right to even think about it. Like I have no effing clue what her life is like. Right. And I think of like, if that person is under that much scrutiny and that much trauma, what are the rest of us dealing with? Like legit cancel culture. I think the reason why people aren't being vulnerable and aren't sharing like she did, which I think I don't think should be considered incredibly brave, but it is. It should be normal that you just go, hey, I'm out of it and I can't do this right now. But I feel like that people watch that and they see that happen and go, well, I'm not gonna air my dirty laundry. I'm not gonna say what I'm doing. I gotta show up. And the flip side of that is, if you make a mistake, there's this whole cancel culture idea behind nobody going, oh, that was really effed up. Like, I love that you can tell me, hey, you know what? I think the board of your charity has some issues. We're still friends. I still love you. I appreciate your insight. I'm going to take that and see what I can do about it.
Yeah.
But that should be it. Like, it's not like, oh my gosh, we're done talking. I can't be your, you know, and I think that's driving the mental health of this country, and just not even this country, the planet, like into a place where I don't know how we recover from that.
Yeah. You're catching me in a weird moment with this one, because it's something that I am diving into newly in my life.
And if you don't want to dive into it,
no, I'm happy to.
We don't have to.
I reserve the right to change my mind on this. And, you know, there's a lot of things happening in my life that
I do that with everything.
If this podcast blows up in the next couple of years based on what I'm doing in my career, I'm going to say right here, right now, cancel me if you need to, but I reserve the right to change my mind.
Right.
You know, I spent a lot of time, all my life, actually, making space for people who were homophobic. I'll keep it in that lane, but even beyond homophobia, that really had such a different point of view than my own. And I made that space in order to create a conversation I asked a lot of, like, the way that I created that space is by asking tons of questions.
Sure.
The more you ask questions, the more people end up poking holes in their own stories.
100%.
Why do you hate gay people? Gay people, da, 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 right? Whatever it is, it's against Jesus. Who taught you that? Right? Instead of taking any of that in, I was able to create these conversations and create space in myself, despite my discomfort, to help to shift some perspectives.
Yep.
More often than not, you're able to. That's what I've learned in that process. In the last couple of weeks, that's how fresh this is for me. I've had a lot of rage bubble up that I didn't know was there. Because how dare you, me, make space for people like that?
Mm.
And it never even occurred to me what message I was really sending to myself by making that space. I tend to believe that I'm going to land somewhere in the middle on this issue. I'm not going to have rage, and I will have some space, but I'm not just going to automatically meet someone because we're staying in the lane homophobic and make them my friend.
Sure.
And thereby change their mind and have one less asshole out in the world, you know?
Yeah.
But as of this moment, I have such anger about the amount of people that I have had to accommodate because they couldn't take a look around the world and realize that they should just stay in their lane.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. I think for me, people ask me all the time, well, what's the answer? And honestly, I think the answer is education. I think it is to make that space for them. I think it is to say, tell me more about why you feel the way you feel. And as you nailed it, like the more you ask them questions, the more they blow holes in their own ideologies. And I have found that the reason why people get so defensive when you ask questions is because they recognize they don't fucking know. Like, well, why do you believe that? Well, because no, okay, well, what evidence do you have to back it up? What experience have you had? Well, you don't know, just shut. And I'm like, no. Let's unpack it, because the more we unpack it, the more you realize you're full of shit. And that's been my experience. And I think it's completely reasonable, and not that my opinion matters, but I think it's completely reasonable for you to go, I'm done with that for a while, to take a season where you're like, I'm angry because I've had to do so much of this for so long, and to like, it's totally normal. And I think it's completely reasonable, to go, hey, right now, I'm just pissed at you because you're dumb and I don't understand it. It's okay. Right.
Yeah. The other thing about asking people questions, Keith, I have found is that it's a matter of time until they ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
And if they feel like you have listened to them, people will listen to you. And so it's a way to have an actual exchange of ideas, rather than, well, I don't agree, and I don't agree, and I don't agree. And so no one's listening to anyone. Asking questions and asking questions and asking questions. It's a matter of time before someone realizes that, oh, I'm talking to someone gay right now. Well, what has your experience been? Or does that hurt? Does what I'm saying hurt you, or whatever it is, right? And then you kind of get the opportunity to say, it really does hurt me.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, right? As far as Simone Biles and cancel culture are concerned, I think I think Simone Biles was not canceled. I think she was
No,
really
I don't think
trolled.
they're the same.
Yeah, I think she was really trolled, but also extremely supported. And I've been trolled, but never on the mass scale of Simone Biles.
Sure.
But on a more massive scale than probably just your average person. And just because I have a following and, whatever. But I think that we're really in dangerous territory in calling it cancel culture. Because what's really happening is that there's accountability being demanded. And we're seeing so many people with an inability to take that accountability, even if they don't agree. So I'll take Piers Morgan as an example.
Okay.
Because of he's been canceled now, and it was all around Meghan Markle and some things that he said that some people said, that many people said were racist.
Sure.
If Piers Morgan wanted a way out of cancellation, the way to do it is to listen to those people, to the people who say this is racist, instead of just fighting, this was not racist, I have a right to an opinion, I'm an opinion host, this is why it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Okay, well, then great, that's your opinion. You have to suffer the consequences of not trying to expand beyond what you believe. And in my opinion, his cancellation is his choice. He's choosing cancellation over meaningful dialogue, over ego, and considering that possibly what he did might have been racist.
Sure.
And maybe he doesn't understand that because he's never been a victim of racism, right? And I could pick and point to people who are being canceled for social issues. And I think you'll find a lot of that same thing, that it's a lot of like, I want my cake and eat it too. Like, okay, politically, I don't fall into a camp. That's something that I should say before I say what I'm about to say. But the same people who are conservative, who won a Supreme Court case saying that a bakery does not need to make a cake for them, want to be able to go into a store and not wear a mask if the store mandates it. Someone explain that to me, because it doesn't, I mean, it's just common sense, right? You fought for the right for a business to be able to turn down someone for this reason. And now you're being turned down for this reason and you're real butthurt about it.
Yeah.
So I think what's really happening is, and why shift is important and the conversations you're having are really important, it is radical accountability. And what it feels like is that rights are being taken away. But what's really happening is that privilege is being exposed. And so when privilege starts to be equalized to the people who had it, it feels like they're losing their rights. But in reality, what's happening is that we're entering very slowly, too slowly, a time of leveling the playing fields just a little bit. And people are really having a hard time with it, especially celebrities, because they're spoiled, because celebrities, I mean, Dreammaker in and of itself was created because of the responsibility I felt that people who have a platform have to help people, right?
Yeah.
Who gives them their platform? Regular people. So don't take your platform and not take any responsibility for, we're all handing you your dream with every like, click, view, movie ticket, album sale, but you owe something back, and not just, especially at a certain financial, like when you're, heading toward billionaire status, you owe something back to the community that provided that for you. But I think that those people are so used to getting away with whatever, right? That now we've dubbed this thing cancel culture.
Interesting. I think there's a lot there, and I am so grateful for you being comfortable being really raw and honest about it. I don't think I disagree. I don't know how much, like, it's fascinating to me because we use words, and I tend to really kind of like want to think that through more, right? Because I think, one, we do a horrible job of like labeling shit, because like cancel culture, to your point, it's really a bad phrase, right? Like people aren't really being canceled, because as soon as the left decides that somebody did something wrong, then the right just rallies behind them and they get more work, right? So they're not really being canceled, right? It's and even like defunding the police, which is not a topic I really want to get into, but like that's not what they're asking to do. They're not asking to take money from they're asking to reappropriate funds, but that's just not sexy. So like we have
Well, I
this
think a lot
really,
of people are trying to defund the police, to
I
be
think some
clear.
are,
I think
and
a lot of people, more
and
than not. I think
yeah, but
when you hear someone saying that term, they really mean it more times than not.
well, the conversations I've had privately with people, that's not what they've meant, and they've said like it's a poor moniker for the
Yeah, I mean, I
cause,
get where you're coming from, and I
right?
think there are two
Like
camps.
we make it very, we try to get, we live in this hashtag society, right? We're gonna we got to come up with a quick sexy hashtag. Doesn't matter if the words actually mean what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
And I think that also gets confusing. What I know I agree with what you said, and resonates really deeply, is the lack of consistency. Because you're 100% correct. If the business owner has the right to run their business as they see fit, period, full stop, that means that they can do things that you find offensive and they can do things that I find offensive, but they can do that. And then we get to make the choice to go, I'm not shopping there. I will shop there. I'm going to go beyond not shopping there. I'm going to sit out front with a picket sign, or I'm going to tell all my friends about what I think or feel. And I'm going to expose the thing that I think is wrong. And I think where it's gotten really ugly is, and polarizing, in my opinion, is the lack of consistency. Because I can't explain to you why people are upset with a business making a mask rule or not making a mask rule, because it's consistent with what the Supreme Court has said is the law. And so you can't really be mad about it. When you supported this argument and you don't support this one, then you just look privileged and spoiled. And well, it's my ball and I'm going to go home now. Right.
right.
So I don't know how to, I can't explain that. It's, and I think for me, that's where I really want to like dive into in these conversations, exposing some of that hypocrisy and the inconsistencies, and going, look. And I had this probably about a year and a half ago. I attended a seminar. It was very small and intimate, and we worked through some core values, some core beliefs. And for me, where I landed is one of like three core beliefs of mine was freedom. And as I dove into what that word meant and what freedom looked like, I realized that if it's a core value, it's something that I should support across every sort of platform and every arc, right? And I found areas in my life, and I'll use my children as an example, where I wasn't honoring that core value. And I was trying to control them in ways that didn't really honor their freedom. And, I know some parents will be like, well, they're 6, like that. Yeah, there's a responsibility there to keep them safe and to keep them from certain things. But I'm referring to, like, I would argue with my 13-year-old about how to clean the kitchen. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why am I getting mad because he's not doing it the way I'm doing it? If at the end of the day, the result is the same, or the result meets the desired expectation, should I really be mad at him for doing it his way? Like that's kind of arrogant on my part. That's kind of against my core values. And so I came home and I told my kids, I said, look, this is the sort of epiphany that I've had. And they were like, I'm sorry, what? You mean we can do it how we want? And I was like, yeah, and I apologized and was like, I'm sorry that I was out of alignment. I wasn't seeing things clearly. And I feel like so often we don't think about, and it drives me crazy the way he cleans the kitchen. It makes zero fucking sense to me how he does it. But it's not for me to be able to step back and go, you know what? The way you live your life drives me nuts, but it's your life, man. I don't have any right to tell you, as long as you're not hurting someone else. And I think that's where we get into this like story around emotion rather than like what's hurting, right? Like if somebody doesn't like me wearing a kilt, I could choose to be emotionally injured by that. But the reality is it doesn't matter. And there's this huge privilege piece that you've brought to my awareness that I need to really think about, because there are people who are experiencing things that the reality is it can get him killed. And I don't think enough of us really put that serious of a frame on it. So for that, I think that's really powerful. It's really good stuff.
And it's dangerous for them to not think about how they're being perceived
It
at
is.
all times.
It is. It shifts the
So-
conversation for me a little bit. So I really appreciate you sharing that, even though that might be, hard for you or tricky for you, or because you're right. People are going to hear this and they're going to go, he's full of shit, and that's okay, right? They're allowed to have that opinion. But I do want to, before we wrap up, I do want to give you, I want to talk about Dreammaker. I want to share with people what you do, why you do it, what that looks like, how they can get connected. I love the idea of like, there are people who are doing really well and should pay it forward. And taking on the responsibility of sort of bringing that awareness out. So tell me about that. Tell us what.
Yeah, so Dreammaker started as a hashtag in 2013, and grew in the Las Vegas community initially. Basically what it is, people from around the world, all walks of life, would tweet me their biggest aspirations, not their wishes, but their dreams, their big dreams. And I would do what I could to find ways to help them. And without using any money ever. Because I realized very early on that so many people think that money is the thing that's holding them back.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like if you removed the finances of it, the level of ingenuity, creativity, and hard work that comes into play would make it so much more satisfying.
It is.
Over the years, we've done some remarkable things. The hashtag grew, it moved across platforms. We've built a dojo for a sensei who teaches karate to kids for free. It's been featured on the Today Show, in Forbes, in People magazine. We've affected countries in all the French-speaking countries in Africa. I mean, it's really, the ripple effects have been really, really more than I ever thought, and definitely more than I know, right? Because like this kid in Senegal who got a coloring book because it was someone's dream to make a coloring book with characters that looked like the kids in the village and tell a female empowerment story. I have no idea what kid that's going to affect, or all of them, or, so, and they'll go out into the world and do amazing things, maybe just because they had access to this one resource, or it ended up being several resources in this case, or the kids who are doing karate who might be the future president of the United States, or might stay in their community and take over the dojo, right?
And they might just have a better life.
Right, exactly. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, they could just deal with the stuff that they may not have otherwise had the tool to deal with. Like, and I love it because so many organizations or projects are built around just throwing money at it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to raise X amount of dollars. I'm going to do this. I'm going to solve this. And it reminds me of the quote, it's not your lack of resources, it's your lack of resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Like, just pulling together. And sometimes it just takes a person who isn't in the middle of the challenge to say, well, what if we did this, and this? And then it's like, oh shit, I could, okay. And then they start to see a pathway to that, right? So like, I think the biggest thing that Dreammaker's done from what I've seen is like providing hope, right? It's or being somewhat heard, even in dreams that aren't realized. Something else is coming out of that's got a positive ripple that is going to lead to something better, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm an avid follower of a 12-week guided curriculum called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And one of the tenets in the book is that God is mentioned in the book a lot, but not in this man in the sky kind of a way, in sort of a good orderly direction kind of way, right? And one of the major tenets of the teachings is that even just by declaring your dream, you're bringing it closer and also creating a space for synchronicity. That you could saying, you know, it's better to say I am than I want, but either way, it still is bringing that energy to you. So yeah, Dreammaker's been a major labor of love. I'm actually taking a step back from it in this moment. It's been a lot of work and a lot of focus, and never always like a part of whatever. I don't get paid. There's no, you know what I mean? It's not, that's not what it is. So it's always a part of a life that I'm building. And also there's an immense amount of responsibility that comes with it personally. And I think I'm burning out a little bit on how hard it's been to bring it into the zeitgeist. And, you know, I'll be really honest, the way the Today Show told the story was disappointing. The way I met with the Ellen Show, they really couldn't wrap their head around how I would do this with no money, because they were thinking about maybe making it something for Ellen too.
That's kind of Ellen's thing, right? She writes a check, she gets somebody to write a check, she gets a car, there's a
which is great. I mean, she's changing lives just the same.
No, it's great.
But at the end of my life, my goal, you know, she started her end of season, and I saw that in her opening monologue of her final season, she said that they've given away, the Ellen Show has given away over $1 billion. And when I am done with whatever I'm doing, that's not on my list of what I want to be able to say. I would much rather say I helped 200 people live a life they never thought was possible. To me, that has more substance to it, more grit to it. I would love to be able to say I helped 1 billion people do that. But in order to do that, I need people to rally around the idea and really say, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit to 1, commit to 3, commit to 10. And it keeps me awake at night sometimes because, like, for example, trans woman in Grove, Oklahoma, I brought that story to the Ellen Show, even though I was warned by someone very high up not to. In fact, if you know me, I brought it because I was warned not to. And because Rosalie's existence can't be erased. And I won't sit back and because there's this opportunity for me that really falls into line with my own dreams, right? I will not be complicit in erasing Rosalie. I just can't. And so it was the first one I brought there. And, you know, it screwed me for sure. There were some things said that made me realize these were not my people, that if they got out into the public would have been part of cancel culture for sure. And I go to bed thinking about Rosalie so often and like how easy her dream is. It is so easy, Keith. It is so easy. And there are so many like that. And it just, you know, here we are, it's coming up on 10 years. I'm going to finish out the dreams I have slated for this year and take a little breaky. The other thing is that in all of this time, not one person has asked me my dream. And that has started to weigh on me. It started to weigh on me about 5 years ago, you know, like, because it occurred to me, it's just weird, right? And all these people have interviewed me, and there's a series about Dreammaker in Forbes. It's called the Dreammaker Chronicles, and I'm on the Today Show, and I've helped all these people, and no one has ever really been like, so I am walking the walk. I realized also that maybe part of the reason why Dreammaker hasn't really done what I want it to do is because I really need to focus on my dream. Because with my dream comes a platform, and with that platform, I can make Dreammaker what I want it to be.
Yeah.
But if I were Ellen or Barack Obama or Laverne Cox or anyone, and no one was asking me for money for the first time,
Yeah.
they just wanted me to connect a resource or become a mentor or make an introduction or I mean, there's so many different ways you can go about it, right?
Absolutely.
I would be thrilled and I would want to be involved. And it's started to not make sense to me why this ask is so much bigger than, hey, will you give me $1 million for my Gorilla Foundation?
Right. So what is Rosalie's dream?
She wants to go to college.
She wants to go to college.
She wants to get a degree in early childhood education and help kids, specifically kids that are dealing with gender dysmorphia and gender issues, and create a pathway for them, which, I mean, we need.
Yeah.
We're in a world that really needs that right now. And, you know, this dream is as simple as the right person at University of Phoenix hearing the story and going, here's a password. It costs them nothing.
Yeah.
All of their, or any online, right? Any online school can give her an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And from there, what she can do.
Yeah, it changes the game, right?
Right. Now she's, well, first of all, just the act of doing it is going to tell this person, your dream is worth.
Yeah.
Right? Like anything in the world can happen to you.
Yeah.
But secondarily, it's her pathway out of a trailer with 7 others and out of Walmart. One of the things that she sent to me when she initially reached out to me, it was a really, really big, sad story that she wrote, which is common. I think that a lot of people think I'm not going to help them if they don't have a sob story, which is funny because like shows like the Today Show also feel that way. They're like, what's the backstory? And my whole thing is, it doesn't actually matter. If I can help you, I will help you. A lot of journalists have asked me, like, what if they're lying? And I'm like, don't care. That's on them, not on me.
Yeah.
If I can help you, I'll help you.
Yeah.
I'm also not handing out dollars. So,
well, and that's the accountability piece, right? You're showing up, you're saying, if I can help you, I will help you. It doesn't matter if you're going to scam me, because that's on you. I'm going to show up and I'm going to love my fellow human.
Exactly.
The best way that I can.
And there have been a couple scams, I think.
Sure.
I think in the back of my head. But yeah, so Rosalie, I lost my train of thought, but.
No, it's good. So if you're listening to this, if you know somebody at the University of Phoenix, if you know somebody who's an administrator at an online school, if you know of a person that you can connect, we're not asking for money. We're not asking for scholarship. It's how do we get that person's foot in the door? How do we get the conversation moving?
That's
and so
right.
the least we can do.
I helped her with Pell Grants. You know, I reached out to, I don't know if you're familiar with Allison Seraphin. She was a really helpful resource. She used to work for Teach for America. So she was really able to help. I know what I was going to say, which is that Rosalie sent this very sad story. And my response to her was, hi, thank you for sharing all of this with me. It's really personal. I want you to know I heard you. Would you be kind enough to put a list together of the 20 resources that you have available to you right now? There's a reason I do that, and it has to do with accountability, as I'm sure you can read between the lines of, you know, on that list can be a pen and paper.
Yeah.
She's emailing me, so she has an email account, right?
Yeah.
So how can maybe I can help reshape this list of 20 into something. Her list of 20 hit me. And I've asked this of a lot of people, and her list of 20 hit me really, really a lot, because she really tried and she's really not dealing with a lot of resources. But in her initial email, she said, if I had a reliable form of transportation to get to and from work that would be life-changing for me. Even a bike. She specifically said that. So there was a different dreamer who was leaving New York to move to Iowa in the middle of the pandemic and happened to have 2 bikes and she only needed one. And so on her way to Iowa, she drove a full day out of her way to Oklahoma.
Wow.
Found Rosalie because I didn't have an address, delivered that bike, and then drove on to Iowa. So, and this is someone who did not have any money at all to her name, the person who did this.
Right. Do you find that the most generous people are the ones that are the least financially stable?
No, no. I find that the most abused
Really?
people, of which I'm one, which is where this idea even came from.
Yeah.
I had nobody. I was alone in the world and I had to figure out my way through life. And I just started to think about, like, where would someone who has zero resource, like, listen, I left home. It was an extremely abusive situation, like beyond what anyone ever wants to hear about. And I could have chosen to stay, but it was not possible really. And I was white. I lived in New York City. I had beautiful clothes. I left with a backpack and a vocabulary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was so well educated, extremely cultured. So I was starting with some really, my first big job was in cold fusion research because I was smart. And it was like, granted, I made $43,000 a year in New York City, which is not even livable.
It's not even,
it's probably not even minimum wage, but I was talking to scientists from DARPA and NRL and Stanford Research Labs and Pirelli, and I don't know how you would do that if you didn't have some of the resources that I had. I had $0.
Sure.
So it's been a long journey to live in a place that I love.
Yeah.
That I feel relaxed in, because I didn't have any money. So that was mine. But I thought I don't want anyone to feel like they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So that's really where it started.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know there's studies.
So I think it makes sense that the people who are abused or know that feeling in some way, know that alone, that lonely alone, I have no one feeling, tend to really want to step up to the plate. And I'll tell you the other thing that's really pushing me to take a step back is this: you're such a good person. No, I'm not. Well, I am a good person. I do my best. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And
I think we all do, right? Yeah.
When it comes to integrity, I really, really don't color outside the lines of that for myself. And I think that for me, that's like the lane of goodness is,
sure.
Are you in your integrity? But so many people are just like, you're such a good person. You're so inspiring. No, get off the couch, turn off Netflix. It will literally take you 10 minutes to change someone's life. Literally, I've changed a life in less than 5. Changed the trajectory of someone's entire existence on this planet in less than 5 minutes. That's how impactful just saying, what is your dream? How can I help? Can be.
Sure. Yeah. And if you have the resource, it's legitimately just a phone call. And that can be the thing that changes. Yeah, that's fascinating, man. I think, boundaries are good. Seasons are important, And so, hopefully somebody's hearing this. I think it would be amazing for someone to hear this and do just that, right? Like, get off the couch and go do something and change someone's life. That's why I do this podcast. That's why I talk to people like yourself. Because, I know it's cliche and you probably don't want to hear it, but you are inspiring and you are a good person. I think everybody's a good person on the right day, right?
Sure.
And it's okay to say, hey, I'm a good person, and right now it's all really heavy and I need to refresh, right? Because part of the challenge, I think, for a lot of people is they get into these labels and these identities, and it's like, well, I do this thing, and so if I'm not doing this thing, who am I? What am I? Where do I land? And it's okay to go, hey, I do this thing, and for the next week, month, 6 months, year, I'm not going to do that thing because I have to reset and I have to recharge and I have to maybe even refine what that thing looks like. And it's okay for it to just be a season of whatever. And somebody, I mean, I wrote a book, I self-published. I didn't do it honestly for any reason other than I had all this crap I had to get off my chest, and I felt like it was a good format for me to do it. And it sold probably just under 1,000 copies, which in the world of book writing isn't great, but as a
That's
self-published
amazing.
author,
Are you kidding?
yeah, as a self-published author, like 500 is kind of the average. And so I look at it and I go, and I've had people say, well, when's the next one coming out? Or what are you going to do? Or how do you, and I'm like, look, I did it for me, and I did it hoping that it would help some people. And I've got the emails that people have written me and said, hey, you know what? This thing really helped me through this thing. Or, hey, I quit my job and I did this other thing that I really wanted to do because I realized I wasn't taking ownership of my life. And if I
Also, the
never
number one deathbed regret. I don't know if you know that.
100%, I should have done. I would have.
I should have written a book specifically.
Oh, really?
It's the number one deathbed regret.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
So there you
Yeah,
have
so
it.
for me, it was just like I had to do it. And I had one person who was like, I've been writing my book for 10 years. And I'm like, well, quit. The thing that was fascinating for me was writing the book was easy because it was for me. It was cathartic. It wasn't like I didn't struggle to do it. It just fell out of me. The hard part was publishing it, because once I published it and once I hit go, then it was out there. And then it was like I couldn't control the people who have written me letters and said, you're full of shit, this isn't any good. And I'm like, okay, that's possibly true, but I have other ones that say it's great, so I'm gonna just lean into those and not worry about the rest, right?
Yeah.
And I think my intention is that someday I will take the content from this podcast and translate that into the written word and use that as a second book. But I think because nobody wants to sit around and listen to 100 episodes of people like you and me rambling, but they might sit down with a cup of coffee and turn to a page that's going to give them a nugget, and then they go on about their day and they're better for it. And that's really, I think, all we can do is keep trying to do our best, keep putting out,
I will
sharing
say
our
this to you,
experiences.
Keith. One of the major reasons why I love you so much and why I respect you so much is that in my humble existence, something that I've observed is that the highest form of worship of a higher power is creation. And it's all you do all the time. And not only that, but you're also in the business of helping other people create. And I just think it's, you want to write a book, you write a book. You pushing that publish button, you say it's like was the hardest part, but the fact that you did it, I can't even explain to you how huge that is, because it doesn't make sense to someone like you, because that's just who you are. You just do it. But it's so remarkable. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I want to hold up a mirror and say, I don't think that people don't want to sit around listening to 100 episodes of your podcast. I think people do want to do that. And I think that people are in awe of the fact that you decided you wanted a podcast and you figured out a way to do it. So just, that's my mirror for you to take accountability of like those kinds of thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I do think that people care what you have to say. I mean, for me, I knew that I was going to have an interesting conversation. I knew that I'm allowed to disagree. you know, I know you in this way of like,
Yeah.
you're very generous, not only of yourself, but also of all the things that you're creating. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, man. That means a lot. And I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
Cool.
And I cannot thank you enough for
So
taking
fun.
90 minutes and being raw and transparent and super vulnerable.